The world has never quite forgiven a woman for being content without it. It will forgive her nearly everything else. It will forgive her poverty if she bears it quietly, and her plainness and even her cleverness, so long as she keeps the sharpest part of that to herself. What it cannot abide is a woman who has looked at the whole shining machinery of it, the marrying and the belonging and the being chosen, and has smiled, and has said that she is very well as she is. The town of Cressmere had never once believed her. Cressmere was a watering place, and like every watering place it lived upon the joining of people together. Its long, bright summers ran upon courtship the way a mill runs upon water. Mothers arrived with daughters, much as merchants arrive at a fair. There were the morning walks and the evening assemblies, the concerts where nothing was heard and everything was noticed, and over all of it the tireless hum of the one question the whole town was built to ask, which was who should have whom. Into the middle of all this, 8 years before, had come Linnet Marrow with a little money she had earned and less that anyone had given her, and had done the one thing the town could never account for. She had opened a shop and prospered and stayed unmarried, and appeared to every watching eye to be perfectly happy about all three. Her shop stood at the good end of Cross Street, a circulating library and booksellers, with a fine bow window, and her own name above the door in plain gilt letters. The town's ladies came to it as much for the warmth as for the reading. Linnet kept good fires and better company, remembered what each subscriber liked before they had quite admitted it to themselves, and could turn a caller who had come to gossip into one who left with 3 volumes and a promise to return by Friday. She was 28 now, and she wore her success as she wore her plain gray gowns without apology and without display. And still, twice a week at the least, some kind soul set about the work of rescuing her from herself. That Thursday it was Lady Halloway, a soft and comfortable widow who patronized the shop and pitied its owner in equal measure, and who had brought with her, by no accident, a nephew lately come down from the north. He was an agreeable enough young man with an agreeable enough income, and he stood among the shelves turning his hat in his hands while his aunt did the speaking for them both. "It seems such a waste," Lady Halloway said gently, the way she always said it. "A woman of your sense, my dear, with no one to share it. You cannot mean to keep this little shop until you are gray. A woman ought to have a home of her own." Linnet wrapped the widow's books in paper and tied the string before she answered, for she had learned that a small task gives a hard sentence somewhere kind to land. "I have a home of my own," she said. "I have the rooms above this shop, and I chose the paper upon every wall myself, and no one crosses the threshold whom I have not asked." She smiled, and the smile was a true one, which was the part the town could never quite believe. "You are very good to think of me, but I have not stayed unwed by mishap or misfortune, whatever is supposed of me. It was a choice freely made, and it suits me a great deal better than most are willing to imagine." Lady Halloway gathered up her parcel, and her nephew, and her pity, and went out into the bright street, looking faintly baffled, as they all went out baffled. And Linnet stood a moment among her own books, beneath her own name, and was, whatever Cressmere chose to believe, entirely content. She did not yet know that the one choice she was surest of in all the world was about to be tried as it had never been tried. She did not know his name, but it was already on its way to her. She had not always kept a shop. Linnet Marrow had been born to another life, in a good stone house in a green county, the only child of a gentleman named Elias Marrow. Her father had not been rich, but he had possessed something the world once prized above riches. He had been trusted. He was careful and exact and kind in the quiet way of men who would rather do a good turn than speak of it. And all through her childhood, his word had stood as good as another man's written bond. That was the very thing they used to destroy him. When Linnet was 20, a great scheme came into the county, one of those dazzling ventures that visit a quiet place once in a lifetime. There was to be a canal cut through the valley, and a company formed to cut it, and upon the company's books stood the names of very great people. Those names did no work. The trusting and the managing and the persuading of neighbors fell to men like her father, respectable men of the middling sort, who lent the venture their good standing and their own savings, and who assured their friends it was sound because the great names had assured them it was sound. It was not sound. What the truth of it was, folly or fraud, she never fully learned. She knew only that the money did not go where it had been promised, and that when the whole gleaming edifice came down, it fell not upon the great, but upon the small. The great names withdrew as smoothly as they had lent themselves, and let the ruin roll downhill, and at the foot of the hill stood Elias Merrow. It was his name in the account books, and his name in the newspapers, and so it was his name that carried the blame for money he had never touched and a wrong he had never done. He was ruined inside a single season. The stone house was sold over their heads, the green county turned its face away, and within 2 years he was dead. The doctor set down a failure of the heart, and perhaps that was true enough, though Lynn had always believed the plainer truth was that an honest man had been named a thief in every paper in the county and had found he could not go on living inside the word. More was taken from her that year than her father and her home. There had been a young man, the son of a good family, who had spoken to her of the years ahead as though they belonged to them both. He did not speak of them again once the ruin was known, nor trouble to say as much to her face. He simply ceased, the way a fire ceases when no one tends it, and married a banker's daughter that spring. So Lynette learned in a single year what a promise was worth once the weather turned, and how much shelter a woman might expect from any name except her own. She did not break. That was what the world never understood about her afterward, mistaking her composure for coldness. She had been broken once already, all at once, and found in the wreckage a strange, bracing freedom. She had nothing left that could be taken, and a woman with nothing left to lose is the freest creature walking. She sold the last small things that were hers, learned a trade, and built, board by board and book by book, a life that leaned upon no one's promise and asked no one's protection. And she swore, in the silence of that building, that she would never again place her happiness in the keeping of another living soul. She had held to that vow for 8 years, and meant to keep it for the rest of her life. She did not know that the great names which had ruined her father had never once been made to answer for it, nor that the past she believed buried was at that hour being folded into a letter that bore her name. The letter came on a gray morning in the first week of autumn, carried by a rider whose livery she did not know. It was a single sheet, thick and costly, sealed with a weight of wax her whole month's post rarely earned. Her name stood on the outside in a firm black hand that leaned a little forward, as though written at speed by a man with small patience to spare. Within were 4 lines, and not one more. She was invited, the letter said, to order and catalogue the library at Wynhaven, a labor of some months, for a sum she read twice to be certain of. A carriage would be sent the moment she named the day. There was no flattery in it and no explanation, and it was signed with no Christian name and no flourish, only a single word set down plainly, the way a man states a fact he has never had to argue for: Vernham. Lynette laid the letter on the counter and looked at it a while. She knew the name, as the whole kingdom knew it. The Dukes of Vernham were among the oldest families in England, and Wynhaven held one of the finest private libraries in it. That such a house should send for her, a shopkeeper in a watering town, was not flattering. It was strange. Great houses did not notice women such as she, except as she had good cause to remember, in order to ruin them. Browse. Every instinct built across 8 careful years told her to refuse. She had no need of his money, and had sworn never again to walk willingly into the shadow of the great. And yet it was said to be the finest library in England. And she was who she was. There are hungers that outlast even ruin. Beneath the caution and the vow, some part of her, she had thought, long starved, sat up at the thought of those shelves. It was not the money that loosened her resolve. It was the books, and she told herself firmly that it was only the books. She wrote 3 words in answer, gave them into the writer's hand, and did not yet feel the ground shift beneath her feet. I will come. By the end of that week, the whole of Cressmere knew that Linnet Marrow was going to Wynhaven, and the whole of Cressmere had an opinion about it. She had told no one but the girl who was to mind the counter in her absence, yet a town that lives upon other people's business does not wait to be told. The livery had been seen. The writer had asked the way at the posting inn. And so, by Saturday, the ladies who came for their volumes came instead for the far better thing, which was to warn her. For if Cressmere knew one thing about the Duke of Vernham, it was that no good ever came of knowing him. They did not agree on why. That was the curious part. Everyone had a Duke of Vernham, and no 2 of them were the same man. Lady Halloway's Duke was a tragic one. There had been a lady once, she said, lowering her voice over the returned novels. A great beauty he was to have married, and something dreadful had come of it. A death, a betrayal, no one quite knew, and he had never been the same again, and had shut himself in that great house and turned his face from the world. It was very romantic, Lady Halloway thought, and very sad, and Linnet ought to take care. The apothecary's wife had a colder Duke. Hers was a proud man, simply, born proud and grown worse, who thought the ordinary run of people beneath the trouble of his notice, and had refused every match his family ever set before him out of plain disdain. 9 seasons, she said. 9 seasons of the finest young women in the kingdom paraded before him, and he had wanted none of them, and had said so, which was the unforgivable part. The vicar's Duke was almost a good man, cold only because grief had frozen him, and generous in ways he took great pains to hide. But even the vicar allowed that he was strange and solitary, and that Wynhaven kept its gates shut against a world it plainly despised. They agreed on nothing except the fact at the center of it all. The Duke of Vernham did not marry. He did not court or flatter, or pay the small coin of society that other men paid. He had turned away every woman the world had offered him, year upon year, until the world wearied of the offering, and left him to his shut-house and his books, and settled, as the world does, upon calling him cold. Linnet listened to all of it, and wrapped her subscribers' books, and said little. She had learned long ago how much of what a town knows is only what a town has decided to feel. She did not believe the tragic Duke, nor the proud one, nor the frozen one. She believed nothing she had not seen. But one small thing she could not make lie down, however, she reasoned with it. A man who had refused the finest women in the kingdom, who wanted nothing the world could offer and asked for no one's company, had sat at his desk in that shut house and written, in his own impatient hand, for her. For a shopkeeper he had never met. To sort books, he might easily have sorted himself. Why? She turned the question over the whole of the 2 days' journey, through the changing country and the failing autumn light, and found no bottom to it. And when, at last, on the 2nd evening, the carriage swung in between 2 great stone pillars, and she saw Wynhaven rise up dark against a dying sky, she still had no answer, and was uneasy to find how much she wished for one. She had braced herself, across that long drive, for grandeur meant to make her small, for the chills such houses keep for those who come by the tradesman's road, for a cold room near the kitchens, and 100 small signs of exactly what she was. Wynhaven gave her none of it, and the giving of none of it unsettled her more than coldness would have done. The great doors opened before the carriage had well stopped, and warmth came out to meet her, light and the smell of wood smoke and beeswax and old paper. She was taken in by the housekeeper, a stout, kindly woman named Odell, who looked at her mended gloves and single trunk with nothing but welcome, and talked her up the great stair as though she had been wanted there a week. "His Grace gave orders you were to be treated as a guest of this house," Odell said, "and not a soul under its roof will do otherwise, so you may set that worry down at the door, miss." Linnet, who had carried that particular worry the whole long way, did not know what to do with being asked to set it down. Her room was not near the kitchens. It was a fine chamber high in the house, with a good fire and a bed turned down. That much a great house might do for anyone. It was the other thing that stopped her on the threshold. By the bed stood a small table, a reading lamp trimmed and lit, and a short row of books waiting between two weights. She crossed to them slowly. They were not chosen at random, nor to impress. They were chosen for her, by someone who had thought what the person coming might most wish to find at the end of a hard road: a volume of the poems she loved best, a book of travels she had never been able to afford, a novel not a month in the shops, which she had not yet got for herself. Someone had gone to trouble. Someone had asked what she loved and answered it in the one coin she had never learned how to refuse. "Who chose these?" she asked, when Odell came up with a tray. The housekeeper looked at the little row of books, and something passed across her comfortable face. "His Grace chose them," she said, "sent word down himself, which is not his way, for as a rule he troubles over no one. I could not tell you why, but he took the pains." She drew the curtain against the dark, and at the door, as though she could not quite help it, added, "He is not what they say of him, miss. Whatever they said where you come from, and I dare say they said their fill. Good night." And she was gone before Linnet could ask what he was instead. She did not meet the Duke that night nor the next day, for he was gone about the estate before she rose, and did not come to dinner. It began to seem she had been brought to a house whose master was a rumor even within his own walls. She met, instead, the Dowager Duchess. The Duke's grandmother was very old and very small, wrapped in more shawls than seemed possible, with quick dark eyes that saw a great deal more than they were told. She looked Linnet up and down once, reached some verdict of her own, and appeared to be pleased with it. "So you are the bookseller," she said. "Come and sit where I can see you, child. They tell me you keep a shop, and answer to no one, and have refused every man foolish enough to ask." She smiled, and the smile was wicked and delighted, and wholly without malice. "Good. I like you already. We shall get on, you and I, for I also answer to no one, and I have buried 3 husbands who thought otherwise." Linnet found, to her own surprise, that she was smiling back. "I had not expected to be glad of anything in this house, Your Grace." "No one ever does," said the old woman, her dark eyes gleaming. "That is rather the trouble with it." She patted Linnet's hand once briskly. "We are 3 souls in a great cold ark of a place, my grandson and I, and the memory of everything that once went wrong, and not one of us has said a true thing aloud in years. He has not come to you yet," she went on. "It was not a question. No, Your Grace, I have not so much as seen him." "Ah," said the Dowager Duchess, and something in the single sound was so knowing that the whole strange house seemed to lean nearer to listen. "Of course you have not. He is circling you like weather. He does that." She closed her eyes, of a sudden very tired. "He will come to you in the library, child. He always does in the end. And when he does, do me one kindness. Watch him. My grandson has taught himself never to want a thing where anyone can see him do it. It will do him good to be watched for once by someone he cannot fool." The library at Windhaven was the finest room Linnet had ever stood in, and for the first hour she forgot to be afraid. It ran the whole west front, 2 stories high, a gallery above and books to the painted ceiling. She had come down before the house woke, unable to sleep for the thought of them, and was up in the gallery with a volume open when a voice spoke quietly from below, and she nearly dropped the book. "I am told you asked who chose the books in your room." She looked down. A man stood in the middle of the great room, looking up at her, and she knew at once that this was the Duke of Vernham. He was tall and lean and no longer young, with a spare, weathered face and dark, steady eyes, and a stillness that was not calm but the held stillness of a man keeping something in check. He did not smile, nor do the small things a man does to make himself agreeable, but only stood and waited. "I did ask," she said, and came down the gallery stair to meet him on the level, for she would be looked up at by no one. I took the trouble, he said. It was neither warm nor cold, only a fact, plain as his name at the foot of his letter. You sell books to half the county. It seemed unlikely you would want for taste, and likely for means. I had the means. She had come braced for the oldest insult there is, the thing such men so often want of such women brought under their roof. It was nowhere in his face. What was there she could not name, held so far out of reach, that for a moment he did not look a powerful man at all, only a man standing very close to something he had promised himself he would never touch. "You are direct, Your Grace," she said. "I am told it is my worst fault." Then, with no more warning, he asked the thing the whole county had wondered, and none had dared. "They tell me you have refused every man who offered for you. A woman alone, unprotected, marriage would be far the easier road. Why have you not taken it?" It was an impertinence, and they both knew it. Linnet looked him full in the eyes, and felt for the first time in years the clean pleasure of being asked a plain question she could answer with a plain truth. And she smiled. "I have remained single by choice, Your Grace," she said. "Not for want of offers, nor of means, nor for any secret sorrow the county likes to imagine. I looked hard at what marriage asks of a woman and what it pays her, and found the account did not balance in my favor. So I keep my own shop and my own counsel, and I am happier than any wife of my acquaintance. I did not suppose a duke would understand it." For a long moment the Duke of Vernham said nothing at all, and Linnet, watching him, saw the strangest thing move across that guarded face, not offense, not amusement, but something far more perilous to them both. She saw a man who had spent his life being wanted for his rank and his name look, for the first time, at a woman who wanted no part of either. He did not know, and neither did she, that in that moment he had begun quietly and hopelessly to fall. He mastered it before it had well finished showing. "Thank you," he said, "for an honest answer. They are rarer than you would credit." He turned and stopped at the door. "You have the run of this room and the house as long as the work takes." "I hope it will not be a short one," he said, and was gone. And Linnet stood alone among the waking books, her heart going faster than she could account for, understanding only that she had come to Windhaven armored against every danger but the one she had just met. The work settled into a rhythm, and the rhythm settled into something Linnet had not felt in 8 years, which was contentment that did not have to be defended. She rose early and went down to the library, and the library was always warm before her, though she never once saw the hand that made it so. She catalogued from the high shelves and the low, and the great room gave up its treasures to her one by one, and she was happy in it, in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The deep, quiet happiness of doing well a thing one was made to do. The Duke did not intrude upon her. That was the first of the many things she had braced for that did not come. She had expected to be watched or managed or called upon to be charming at his convenience, and none of it happened. He was gone about the estate most of the day, and when he was in the house he kept to his own part of it. He asked her for no account of her hours and set her no conditions. And when she sent word by Odell that she would need a second ladder and a boy to hold the far end of the measuring tape, and a clean deal table brought in for the sorting, all three were in the library by the following morning, and no one made her feel she had asked for too much. But he was reading her all the same, and she came to know it through the books. She found the first mark in a volume of essays in her second week, a faint pencil line in the margin, beside a sentence about the folly of men who mistake silence for depth. It was an old mark made long before her coming. She smiled at it, and because she could not help herself, she set a small penciled query of her own beside it, a single word, or cowardice. She thought no more of it, and shelved the book, and 3 days later, taking it down again to enter it in the catalogue, she found beneath her word a fresh line in that same firm hand, or grief. One does not always get to choose which. She stood a long while with the book open in her hands. After that it became a thing between them, though neither ever spoke of it aloud. She would find his old marks in the books as she worked through them, the private conversation a solitary man had been having with his own shelves for 20 years, and here and there, where a thing he had written struck her as wrong, or true, or only half true, she would answer it. And he read what she wrote, for his answers came back, always in pencil, always brief, always some days later, as though he could say to a page what he could not say across a room. They argued the nature of duty and the flyleaf of a book of sermons. They disagreed about a poet in the end papers of the poet himself. It was the strangest courtship in England, if it was a courtship at all, conducted entirely in the margins of other men's books, and Linnet told herself firmly that it was nothing of the kind, and enjoyed it more than she had enjoyed anything in years. She learned the truth about him slowly, and never from him. She learned it from the people of the estate, who spoke of the Duke when they thought she was only a fellow servant, and not worth guarding their tongues before. The cold, proud Duke of the Cressmere drawing rooms did not exist here. Here was a man who had rebuilt every cottage on the home farm at his own charge, and told no one, who quietly paid the doctor's bills of families too proud to ask, who had kept on old servants long past their use, because turning them off would have broken them. He did these things without warmth and without a word, the way he did everything, so that the people who received his kindness were never quite certain whether they had been thanked or insulted, and loved him without in the least understanding him. He is not what they say of him. Odell had told her that first night, and Linnet had thought it the loyalty of an old servant. She saw now that it had been the plain truth, and that the plain truth about the Duke of Vernham was the opposite of everything the world had decided to feel. Once, in her 4th week, she saw the whole of it at a stroke. A neighbor called, a cousin of the Duke's, named Gervase Rook, who, since the Duke had no child, was the man who would one day have Wynhaven, and the title with it. He was a smooth, handsome, smiling person, everything the Duke was not, and he found Linnet on the library steps with her sleeves turned back and dust upon her hands, and he mistook her, or chose to, for exactly what he wished her to be. "You there," he said, not unkindly, the way one is not unkind to a chair. "Tell your master his cousin has come, and have someone bring wine to the small parlor. And smarten yourself before you go into the hall. There is a good girl. We cannot have the county thinking he keeps his house like a rag shop." Linnet had been spoken to in that voice before in the years after her father's fall, and had learned to let it pass over her like weather. She set down her cloth and was framing some quiet civil answer when a voice spoke from the gallery above, and the whole temperature of the room changed. "She is not a servant," said the Duke. "She is the finest cataloguer of books in the kingdom. She is a guest under my roof, and you will speak to her as you would speak to me, or you will not speak to her at all." There was no heat in it. There was never any heat in him, but Gervase Rook went first red, and then very smooth again, and made Linnet a bow so deep it was itself a kind of insolence, and the Duke came down the stair and took his cousin off to the small parlor, and Linnet was left standing among the books with her heart doing something complicated in her chest. He had not defended her because she was a woman, or because she was pretty, or because it profited him in any way. He had defended her because she had been wronged in his hearing, and he could not let a wrong stand. It was, she thought, the most dangerous thing he had yet done to her, more dangerous than the books in her room or the marks in the margins, because there was no answering it, no keeping it at the safe, cool distance where she kept everything. A woman may hold out a long time against a man who wants her. She has almost no defense at all against a man who is simply, stubbornly, and without hope of reward, upon her side. That evening she found a new book left for her on the deal table, a marker in it, and beside the marked passage, in pencil, 4 words, "I am sorry for him." She understood that he meant his cousin, and that it was as near as such a man would ever come to apologizing for a thing that was not his fault, and she sat down rather suddenly in the empty library and put her face in her dusty hands. Not because she was unhappy. Because she was, against every plan she had ever made, becoming happy and did not know how she would bear it when it ended. For it would end. She reminded herself of that walking up the great stair to her room. She had built a whole life upon needing no one, and she did not mean to unbuild it for a set of pencil marks and one cold sentence spoken from a gallery. She had come to sort his books. When the books were sorted, she would go home to her shop and her own name over her own door, and this strange, warm interval would fold itself away into memory, and she would be glad of it and unharmed. She almost believed it. That was the trouble. She had always been so good at believing what kept her safe, and for the first time in 8 years, she had met a truth that would not let her. November came, and the light went thin and blue in the long windows, and the work was half done, and neither of them said a word about what would happen when it was finished. They talked now. Not much, and never easily. But they talked. He fell into the habit of coming to the library in the last hour of the afternoon, when the light was failing and the work was done for the day, and he would stand at the far window with his hands behind his back, and she would sit at the deal table with the day's entries before her. And they would speak across the width of the great quiet room about the books, and then about other things, and then once or twice about themselves. She learned that he had not wanted the dukedom, that it had come to him sideways through the deaths of better-loved men, and that he had never once felt he had a right to it. She learned that he had been alone a very long time and had made a study of it the way another man might make a study of an art, until he was expert in it, until he had persuaded himself it was what he preferred. She recognized every word. She had done the same. They were two people who had each built a fortress out of a wound and called it a choice, and each could see, looking at the other, exactly how the trick was done. "You are laughing at me," he said one evening, not offended. "I am laughing at us both," she said. "We are so very certain, you and I, that we chose our solitude. I begin to wonder whether we chose it or only agreed to it after it was forced upon us, because agreeing hurt less than admitting we had been left." He was quiet a long moment. "That," he said at last, "is the truest cruel thing anyone has said to me in 20 years. Then, after a pause, and more quietly, "Thank you." They spoke, another evening, of her father, though she did not know then how near she was walking to the heart of everything. She told him what she had told almost no one, how good a man Elias Marrow had been, and how the world had let him die a thief in its eyes for a crime he never committed. She expected the easy pity that people gave and that she despised. She did not get it. The Duke stood very still at his window with his back to her, and was silent so long that she thought she had wearied him, and when at last he spoke, his voice was rougher than she had ever heard it. "Then the world," he said, "is a coward, and owes your father a debt it has never paid." He did not turn round. She thought, at the time, that it was only that a just man hates injustice. She would come to remember the moment very differently before the week was out. The Dowager Duchess watched all of this with the barely hidden delight of a general who sees a long campaign at last beginning to move. She took to requiring Linnet's company in the evenings, and requiring her grandsons in the same room, at the same hour, and then falling conveniently asleep by the fire, or recalling some urgent letter she must go that instant and write, so that the two of them were forever being left alone together by an old woman who was about as subtle as a cannon and did not care in the least. "I know what you are doing, Your Grace," Linnet told her once gently. "Of course you do," said the Dowager, patting her hand. "I am too old to be subtle and too fond of you both to be ashamed of it." She looked into the fire, and her wicked old face grew for a moment, unaccountably sad. "Only do not be too clever, child. The pair of you are so proud of your good sense. I have watched a great deal of good sense in my long life keep people safe and warm and entirely alone, right up until the day they died of it. Then she was herself again, and rang for more coal. and the moment passed it came nearest to breaking on a night near the end of the month. They had reached, both at once, for the same volume on a low shelf, and their hands had met upon it in the half-dark, and neither had moved. It was nothing. It was the smallest thing in the world. But she felt the whole still weight of him go rigid beside her, felt the enormous careful control it cost him to hold as motionless as he did. And when she turned her head, he was looking down at her with the guard gone entirely from his face. At last. It was not want, or not only want, it was a kind of grief, a great starved grief, the look of a man gazing through a window at a warm-lit room he has told himself for years he is not permitted to enter. For a moment neither of them was proud, or safe, or sensible. Then he took his hand from the book, and stepped back, and put the guard up again, and it was like watching a man close a door upon himself from the inside. "Forgive me," he said, very low. "There are reasons, you cannot know them, but there are reasons why I have no right to look at you, as I looked at you just now, and I will not do it again." And Linnet, who had been on the very edge of being brave, who had felt the whole careful architecture of 8 years tremble and all but fall, heard the word right and the word reasons, and drew her own hand back, and let the safe, cold distance come down between them once more, and told herself it was for the best, and did not believe it even as she thought it. She lay awake that night, and the question that kept her awake was not why she wanted him, which she had long since stopped being able to deny, but why a man who so plainly wanted her should speak of having no right to it, as though there were some debt outstanding, some old account between them that she knew nothing of and he could not forget. She thought of the way he had said the word right, as a man says a thing he has said to himself 10,000 times in the dark. She thought of his grandmother's warning about good sense, and about the people who had died of being safe. And somewhere in the smallest hours, she admitted to herself the thing she had been refusing to admit for weeks, which was that she did not want to go home to Cressmere at all, and that this was the most frightening discovery of her life. She got her answer sooner than she wished, and not from him. It was the dowager who gave it to her, 3 days later in the cold, bright forenoon, having plainly wrestled with herself and lost. She sent for Linnet to her private sitting room, and shut the door, which she never did, and sat her down, and looked at her a long while with those quick dark eyes gone, for once, entirely without mischief. "Child," she said, "I am about to do a wicked thing, or a kind one. At my age I can no longer tell the two apart. My grandson will never tell you himself, because he is an honorable fool who believes his silence protects you, when all it truly does is leave you walking blindfold toward a cliff that he can see and you cannot." She drew a slow breath. "Before this goes one step further, before you give that stubborn heart of yours to a man who will only break it out of conscience, there is a thing you must know about this family. About what we did a long time ago. And about your father." The dowager told it plainly, in the end, the way the old tell the worst things, without ornament, because at a certain age one has seen too much to dress the truth up kindly. There had been a scheme, she said. A great canal, years ago, before Linnet was grown. It had worn upon its books the names of the highest people in the county, and the highest name upon it, the name that had made every smaller man believe the thing was safe, had been the name of Vernham, my husband's, she said. And after him, for a little while, my grandson's father, the old Duke Linnet, sat very still. They were not clever men, the dowager went on, only greedy ones, and the scheme was rotten from the root, and when it began to fail, they did what such men have always done. They looked about for someone smaller to stand beneath it when it fell. They found a manager, an honest, careful man of the middling sort, who had lent the thing his good name because they had told him it was sound. They put the papers in his hands. They let the world believe the money had gone astray under his care, and when the crash came, they drew the great names up out of the wreck, as clean as you please, and left him standing in the ruin with the whole weight of it upon his shoulders. His name was in the newspapers. Theirs was not. He was ruined and disgraced, and within 2 years, he was dead. She looked at Linnet with her old unflinching eyes. His name, child, was Elias Marrow. And I have known who you were since the hour my grandson wrote your name upon that letter, and I have watched you these 2 months, and loved you and hated myself, and held my tongue. I will hold it. No longer. The room was very quiet. Somewhere below a door closed, and a servant's feet went along a passage, and the ordinary sounds of the great warm house went on, and Linnet sat in the middle of them and felt the floor of the world tilt slowly under her. Her father, the canal, the great names that had walked away clean while he died a thief. She had carried that wound for 8 years without ever knowing the face of the hand that dealt it, and the hand had a name, and the name was the name over the door of the house she had come to love, the name in whose margin she had been quietly writing her heart. "Does he know?" she said. Her own voice sounded very far away. "Does the Duke know who I am? He has known from the first," said the Dowager gently. "That is the whole of it, child. That is the thing his conscience will not let him tell you, and will not let him leave alone. His father did this thing, and died unpunished and unashamed, and left the shame of it to a son who never wanted the title and could not give it back. When the old Duke died, my grandson found the proof among his papers, the proof of exactly what was done and to whom, and it has sat in a locked case in that library for 6 years, eating him alive. He cannot clear your father without disgracing his own dead father and his own ancient name before the whole world. He cannot stay silent without becoming a little more, each day, his father's son. So he did the only thing his crippled honor would allow. He found you. He could not give you back your father, and so he set out, in his cold, secret, helpless fashion, to give you everything else and to ask nothing, ever, in return. The books in her room, the lamp trimmed and lit, the finest library in England, thrown open to a shopkeeper he had never met, his defending her on the stair with that cold, hard voice, his hand drawing back from hers in the dark, and the word right, and the word reasons. All of it turned over in her mind at once and showed her its other face, and the other face was not love. It was penance. She got to her feet. She did not remember deciding to. Then it was never me at all, she said, and she was proud, even then, that her voice did not break. It was his conscience. I was not a woman to him. I was a debt his family left unpaid, and he has spent 2 months settling it in books and in kindness, because he cannot bring himself to settle it in the one coin that would cost him something, which is the truth spoken aloud where the world can hear it. "Child," said the Dowager, and there was pain in the old face now, "that is not all that it is. I would swear before heaven that is not all that it is. I have watched him look at you." But Linnet was already at the door, for she could not stay in that room another moment without weeping, and she had promised herself 8 years before, in the wreck of everything, that she would never again weep where any living soul could see her. "You have been very kind to tell me, your grace," she said, with a steadiness that cost her more than anyone in that house would ever know. And she went out and up the great stair past the room with its waiting books, and she did not look at them, and she began, with hands that shook only a little, to pack her single trunk. She had come to Wynhaven, armored against every danger but one. She had guarded her heart so carefully, and given it in the end to the one man in all the world who had been bound to her, before ever he saw her face, by the ruin of her own father. And she understood at last what the whole strange, gentle interval had truly been, not a courtship, a reckoning, and she meant to be gone from it before he could make her any further a part of it. She was buckling the second strap of her trunk when the knock came. A single knock, and she knew it before the door opened, because no one else in that house knocked as though asking permission to exist. "Come in," she said, and did not turn round. The Duke stood in the doorway and looked at the packed trunk, and whatever it did to him, he kept behind the still face. But she saw his hand tighten once upon the frame of the door, and then let go. "My grandmother has told you," he said. "It was not a question. She told me what you would not." Linnet turned then, and faced him and found she was not weeping and was not going to. The thing in her had gone past weeping, cold and clear and steady, and in its steadiness she understood that the power in the room, for the first time since she had entered his house, was entirely hers. "Yes," she said. "She has told me that your family destroyed my father to save its own name, that you have known it since the day you wrote to me, that the proof has sat in a case in that library for 6 years. And that all of this, the books, the kindness, the whole gentle, careful cage of it, has been the conscience of a rich man buying himself a little sleep at night. Tell me she was wrong. Tell me one word of it is untrue, and I will unpack my trunk." He did not tell her she was wrong. He took it, every word, the way he had taken his cousin's insolence, without flinching and without defense, and when she had finished, he said the last thing she expected. "She was wrong in one thing only," he said. "She believes I meant to buy myself sleep. I have not slept, in any way worth the name, in 6 years, and I did not come to you to begin." Then, quietly, "But the rest is true. Every word of it is true, and I have no right to soften it, and I will not insult you by trying." There it was, the plain, unbearable honesty of him, refusing even now to make itself comfortable. "Then hear what I want," she said, and it steadied her to say it. "I do not want your books, nor your kindness, nor your sleepless conscience. I want the one thing your family has never once given mine. I want the truth said aloud where the world can hear it, and my father's name taken up out of the mud your grandfather left it in. You have the proof. I am asking you to bring it into the light, though it cost you your father's name and your own, and I will stay in this house not 1 hour longer than it takes you to tell me whether you are the kind of man who will." For a long moment, the Duke of Vernham looked at her, and something moved in the still face that she had never seen there before. Not grief, and not guilt, but something almost like relief. The terrible relief of a man who has waited years for someone to demand of him the very thing he has not dared demand of himself. "I will," he said, 2 words, in that plain, flat voice. And yet Linnet felt them settle with the weight of a great door swinging open somewhere in the dark. She had come to sort a dead man's library, and would leave it, if she left at all, having dragged the truth out of the one house in England most set upon burying it. She unbuckled the strap of her trunk. "We are not friends," she said. "Understand that. I do not know yet what we are. But we want the same thing. Now you and I for the first time, and until it is done I will stay." He inclined his head once and went out, and left her standing among the books he had chosen for her, no longer able to tell whether she wished to burn them or to weep over them, and certain only that the safe, cold life she had built was over. The case stood in a shadowed alcove at the north end of the library, a plain iron box no larger than a writing desk, and Linnet had catalogued the great room around it for 2 months without once guessing what it held. Now the Duke unlocked it in front of her, and stood back and let her look. She read the best part of an afternoon, there on the library floor, with the winter light going gray, and by the end of it, she knew exactly how her father had been killed, not with a blade, with paper. Letters in the old Duke's own hand, instructing that the accounts be arranged so, that certain sums be entered under Elias Marrow's name, and certain others quietly removed, that the manager be kept ignorant until the thing was past mending. A memorandum, cold as a butcher's bill, weighing the ruin of one honest gentleman against the good name of a great house and finding the gentleman the cheaper to spend. It was all there. Everything the newspapers never printed. Everything that would have saved her father, had any one of these men had the courage to let it be seen. She did not weep over it. She had gone a long way past weeping. But when she set the last letter down, her hands were perfectly steady in a way that frightened her more than shaking would have done. "This clears him entirely," she said. "It does a great deal more than that," said the Duke from where he stood at the window with his back to her, as he always stood when a thing cost him. "It hangs my grandfather and shames my father in his grave, and sets the word fraud beside the name of Vernham in every paper in the kingdom. For good." He was quiet a moment. "My cousin will one day carry that name. He has a right to know what I mean to do to it before I do it. I will tell him tonight." "Do not," said Linnet with a suddenness that surprised them both. She could not have said why the warning rose in her, only that she had spent 8 years learning to read the faces of comfortable, smiling men, and she had not at all liked the face of Gervase Rook. "He is my heir," said the Duke simply. "I will not strike at my own blood in the dark. It is not how the thing is to be done. It was, she would think afterward, the most honorable mistake she ever watched a man make." Gervase Rook came to her the next morning, and he did not trouble this time to mistake her for a servant. He found her alone in the library, and shut the door behind him with a soft click that she felt along her spine, and stood smiling at her with his back against it. An elegant, unhurried, entirely pleasant man, and told her, in the gentlest voice in the world, precisely what she was. "I have been hearing the most extraordinary things," he said. "My cousin means to fling open a very old grave, it seems, and ruin his house and mine to do it, and all they tell me, since a certain bookseller came to Windhaven." He looked her up and down, unhurried. "You are cleverer than you look, and you look clever enough. 8 years scraping in a shop, and then you find the one door in England that opens on everything your family lost, and you walk through it. And within the season you have the master of the house ready to burn his own name for love of you." He shook his head, admiring. "I could almost applaud it." "You understand nothing," said Linnet. "I understand a great deal," he said, and the smile did not move. "I understand that if that proof ever leaves this room, my inheritance is worth ash, and my name is a byword, and I do not mean to permit it. So let me be plain, since you all value plainness so in this house. Go home. Go back to your little shop and your little life tonight, and I will see you are not the poorer for it. Stay and press him to this madness, and I will make it my whole occupation to see that you are. I will have it known in every drawing room, from here to Cressmere, what you are and how you came here, and what you did to get it. I will ruin your trade and your name, and I will do it whether or not you ever get your precious proof, for a dead man cannot enjoy his good name, and you, madam, most certainly will not enjoy yours." Linnet stood among the books and let it wash over her, cold and smiling and old, so very like every voice that had told her 8 years before what a ruined girl was worth. And she found, somewhat to her surprise, that she was not afraid of it any longer. "You have mistaken me," she said quietly, "for a woman who has something left to lose. I lost it all at 20, and I built what I have from the wreck with my own 2 hands, and there is not one thing in it you can take that I have not already survived the taking of once. Do your worst to my name. I have had my name in the mud before, and unlike my father, I am alive to climb out of it." Then she looked at him very steadily. "But you have told me something useful, in all your smiling. You are afraid. A man certain of burying this thing would never trouble to threaten a shopkeeper over it. Go and be afraid somewhere else." His face changed, then the smoothness cracking clean across, and for one moment she saw the true thing underneath, the greed and the fright of it, and understood that she had made an enemy who would not stop at words. He stopped, that night, a great deal short of words. She was woken past midnight by the smell of smoke, and came down the great stair with her heart in her mouth to find the library door standing open and a red light moving within it, and Gervase Rook at the iron case with a lamp in his hand, and the proof her father's whole vindication already curling and blackening in the grate where he had flung it. She was across the room before she knew she had moved, and her hands were in the fire, and she did not feel them burn. She saved, perhaps, the half of it. The rest went up. Her father's name burned a second time, in a second fire, lit by a second Vernham, and something in her broke, and something else in her hardened past all breaking. And she turned on the men with her scorched hands full of scorched paper, and did not scream, which was somehow worse than screaming. What came through the door then did not look like the Duke of Vernham. She had thought him a still man, a contained man, a man made all of held stillness, and she learned in that moment what the stillness had been holding. He crossed the room and took his cousin by the coat and put him against the shelves hard enough to shake the books upon them, and his face, his careful, guarded face, was terrible to see, and his voice, when it came, was very quiet, and not quiet at all. "You put your hand to a fire in my house," he said, "to burn an innocent man twice over. Get out. Get out of this house tonight, and out of this county, and pray to whatever you pray to that I am able, by morning, to recall that I am a gentleman, for at this present moment, cousin, I am finding it the hardest thing in all the world." And Gervais Rook, who had spent his whole life mocking a strength he had never once seen, went white, and went out and was gone from Wynhaven before the dawn. It was only when the door had closed upon him that the Duke turned and saw her hands. He was across the room again in an instant, and all the terrible stillness was gone out of him, and what was left was only a man frightened, taking her scorched hands in his as though they were the only things of worth in the burning world. His guard was down. It was down entirely at last, and it did not go back up, and Linnet, looking into his unguarded face by the light of the dying fire, understood that whatever else had been true, whatever guilt and whatever debt, the thing she saw in him now was not penance and had never been penance. "You are burned," he said, and his voice was not steady. "You ran into a fire. For paper. You might have for my father," she said, "as you would have, as you have been trying to, alone for 6 years. She was crying now and did not care, and it was the first time in 8 years, and it did not feel like weakness. It felt like something thawing. He lifted her ruined hands and held them against his own face, and shut his eyes, and for a long moment the great, proud, silent man simply held on, the way a drowning man holds on. "I had one thing left that I was sure of," he said at last, very low. "One rule I had kept when I had kept nothing else. That I would not let myself want this, want you. I had no right to it, with what my blood did to yours. And you have walked into fire in front of me for a handful of burning paper, and I find I no longer care in the least what I have a right to." His voice broke on the last of it. "My name is Alaric. No one has used it in years. I find I should like it very much, if you would." "Alaric," she said, trying it, and felt the last cold wall of 8 careful years go down inside her like a house quietly falling. They did not speak of love. There was no time for it, and both of them were too battered and too proud, and half the proof was ash on the hearth. But he held her scorched hands by the ruined fire until the dawn came gray in the tall windows, and neither of them let go. And both of them knew that the safe, solitary lives they had each defended so long were finished, and that whatever they were now, they were it together, which left only the morning and the county and the half of the truth that had survived the fire, and a smiling, ruined man riding hard for Cressmere with a head full of poison and nothing left in the world to lose. They did not sleep, and by first light they had a plan, which is to say, Linnet had a plan, and the Duke, for once in his life, did as he was told. Half the proof was ash. What remained she spread upon the deal table in the cold morning and went through leaf by leaf with her bandaged hands. And when she had done, she found that the fire, for all its cruelty, had spared the one thing that mattered above all the rest. The memorandum was whole. the old Duke's own hand, on the old Duke's own paper, weighing Elias Merrow's life against the name of Vernham, and setting down in ink which of the two was the cheaper to spend. A jury of children could not have mistaken it. It was by itself enough. "Gervais has gone to Cressmere," said the Duke. "He will not wait for drawing rooms. There is an assembly there tonight, the winter subscription, half the county under one roof, and he means to stand up in the middle of it and tell them all what you are, before I can tell them what he is. He will make you a fortune hunter, and your father a thief in the same breath, and he will do it in the one town where you have to live afterward." "Then we had better be at the assembly," said Linnet. He looked at her bandaged hands. "You are in no state. I have been in no state for 8 years, she said, "and gone anyway. We shall need your grandmother." The Dowager Duchess, when the thing was laid before her, did not hesitate a second. "Of course I am coming," she said, already ringing for her maid and her furs and the great old traveling coach that had not been out in a decade. "My husband and my son spent their lives making certain that the name of Vernham was never spoken in the same room as the truth." She smiled, and it was not her wicked smile, it was something older and harder and far more dangerous. "I am 80 years old, my dears, and I have wanted, for 6 of those years, to say one true thing in public before I die. Tonight I shall say it, and I should like to see the man who will tell a Dowager Duchess to sit down." They came into Cressmere as the early dark was falling, and the lamps were being lit along Cross Street, past Linnet's own shut shop with her own name over the door, and on to the assembly rooms, which blazed with light and rang with music, and were packed to the walls with everyone in the county worth the knowing. And into the middle of it, exactly as the Duke had foretold, had come Gervais Rook, smiling, elegant, and busy, moving from group to group with his poison dressed up as concern, so that by the time the doors opened upon the Duke of Vernham and his grandmother and the burned bookseller between them, the whole bright room had already turned to look. And the looking was not kind. Linnet had stood in rooms like this before in the year of her ruin, and been looked at exactly so, and had learned that there is no colder place on earth than a warm room full of people who have decided what you are. She felt the old shame rise in her out of long habit, and then she felt the Duke's arm come steady under her bandaged hand, and heard the tap of the Dowager's stick upon the floor at her other side, and found that she was not, this time, alone in it, and the shame went out of her and did not come back. The music faltered and stopped. Gervais Rook recovered first, as his kind always do. "Cousin," he said loud and easy, spreading his hands to the room as though welcoming the Duke to a party of his own devising. "We were not sure you would come, and you have brought the very person we were all speaking of. How fortunate!" He turned to the room, the picture of a reasonable man made sorrowful by duty. "Perhaps she will save us the trouble and tell you herself who she is and whose daughter, and by what arts a shopkeeper comes to be hanging upon a duke's arm within a single season of finding him." There was a murmur, and the murmur was ugly, and it was the sound of Linnet Marrow's whole life in that county being decided a second time by people who did not know her. The Duke of Vernham let the murmur run its course. He was in no hurry. He had never in his life been in a hurry, and Linnet understood, watching him, that the stillness the county had called coldness for 20 years was about to become the most frightening thing any of them had ever seen, because a still man, when at last he moves like weather. "You wish them to know who she is," he said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Every soul in the room had gone quiet to catch it. "Very well. I will tell them who she is, and a good deal else besides. And when I have done, cousin, they may judge which of the two of us came here tonight to tell the truth." He drew the memorandum from his coat. "Her name," he said, "is Linnet Marrow. She is the daughter of Elias Merrow, a gentleman of this county, whom some of you are old enough to remember, and whom every newspaper in England once was pleased to call a thief." He was quiet a moment, and in the whole crowded, blazing room there was no sound at all. He was not a thief. I hold in my hand the proof that he was not, and I have held it to my lasting shame for 6 years. He unfolded the paper. This is written in the hand of my grandfather, the 4th Duke of Vernham. It concerns the failure of the canal company, whose collapse ruined 100 honest families in this county, and whose whole loss was laid in the end upon the shoulders of one man who had touched not a penny of it. It is an instruction. It instructs that the accounts be arranged so that the blame should fall upon the manager of the company, an honest, careful man who had lent the scheme nothing but his good name. It instructs that certain sums be set down against his name and certain others quietly lifted from the names of the great. And it weighs, in my grandfather's own words, in his own ink, the ruin of that one honest man against the good name of this family. And it concludes, and I will read you his conclusion exactly as he set it down, that the fellow is the cheaper to spend. He looked up. The fellow was Elias Marrow. My grandfather spent him, and my father let him lie spent, and I found this paper in a locked case 6 years ago, and I too for 6 years. Let him lie. There is the truth you wished told, cousin. There is who she is. She is the daughter of the honest man, my family destroyed with a pen to save its own name. She came into my house to sort my books, and she is the finest and the bravest person I have ever known. And 2 nights ago, she put her bare hands into a fire to save this very paper, which my cousin Gervais Ruck had flung into it, because he knew, as you all now know, precisely what it proves. It was then that the Dowager Duchess of Vernham stepped forward, small and terrible and 80 years old, and rapped her stick once upon the floor, and the room, which had begun to roar, went silent as a church. I am the widow of the man who wrote that paper, she said, and her old voice carried to the furthest corner. I am the mother of the man who profited by it. I have carried the name of Vernham for 60 years, and I tell you tonight, on what is very near my own deathbed, that every word my grandson has spoken is true, and that the shame of it is as much mine to answer for as any. Elias Marrow was an innocent man. My family destroyed him, and if there is a soul in this room with the face to call that girl a fortune hunter after what she has done to drag the truth of it into the light, let him say so now, to me. No one in the whole of that county had the face. Gervais Ruck was already moving for the door, but the county was between him and it, and the county had heard and had seen the bandages on Linnet Marrow's hands and understood at last what they were, and it let him pass the way a cold sea lets a man pass, closing behind him, so that by the time he reached the winter street he was alone. Linnet understood, for the rest of his life. He was not arrested. There was no need. In a county such as that, to be known was punishment enough, and he was known now, entirely, and the smiling was over. He rode out of Cressmere that night, and out of the story, and Wynhaven and its ancient name would pass, in the end, to some remote and blameless cousin, who had never so much as heard of a canal which was, the Dowager observed, with great satisfaction, a good deal better than either of them deserved. And Linnet Marrow stood in the assembly rooms of Cressmere, in the town that had pitied her and buried her father twice, and watched the truth she had carried alone for 8 years become, in a quarter of an hour, the possession of everyone she knew. Old men who had cut her father in the street came to her with their hats in their hands and their eyes wet. Women who had crossed the road to avoid the daughter of a thief pressed her bandaged hands and begged a pardon 8 years too late to matter, and yet not, she found, too late to be worth the giving. It was not triumph. It was too sad for triumph, but it was justice. At last, the thing she had stopped believing in, and she took it, all of it, for her father, who could not. It was very late, and the county had gone home to lie awake, before she and the Duke had a moment alone, in a small cold anteroom off the emptied hall, with the candles guttering and the great business of the night behind them. "There is a thing I have not told you," he said. He was looking at the candles and not at her, in the old way, the way of a man to whom the truth came more easily side on. You believe I came to find you 6 years ago when I found the papers. I did not. I began to look for you long before that. Linnet went still. My father did not die silent, he said. He was not a brave man, my father, but he was a frightened one at the last, and frightened men will sometimes tell the truth when brave ones will not. He confessed it to me, the whole of it, on the night he died. He put the key of that case into my hand, and told me what was in it, and what his own father had done. And he begged me not to make it right. He had not the courage even then to ask me that, but only to see that the man's family, if any were left, did not starve. It was the single decent impulse of his life, and it came a lifetime too late to help the man, and I have hated him for it and been bound by it every day since. He turned to her then. So I looked, he said, quietly, for years. I did not know at first that Elias Marrow had a daughter. When I learned it, I learned also that she had refused every hand ever held out to her, and asked no one for anything, and built a whole life out of nothing with a shop and her own 2 hands. And I thought, God forgive me, that she would sooner die than take a penny from the house that ruined her, and that I could not blame her. So I did the only thing left to me, small things. A creditor, who was hounding your father's memory for a debt that was never his, quietly paid off, and called away, and you never knew who did it, or why. Nothing that touched what you had made. Nothing you would ever feel as a debt, because I could not bear to make you owe me, when it was I who owed you everything. Linnet could not speak. And when at last I could think of no smaller way to reach you, he said, I invented the largest one I dared, a commission, the finest library in England, and a woman who could no more refuse it than stop breathing. I told myself it was restitution, that I would give you the season and the work and the fee, and clear your father's name at the end of it, whatever it cost me, and then let you go, and be quit at last of the thing that had eaten me alive for 6 years. He drew a breath. That was the plan. It was a good plan. And I have never in my life been so wrong about anything, because I did not reckon on you. I did not reckon on liking you. I most certainly did not reckon on this. He looked at her, unguarded, ruined, without a shred of defense left. I forbade myself love a long time ago on the sound, reasoning that a man who owes what I owe has no business being happy. And then you walked into my library and were happy in it, and would not need me, and could not be bought. And I fell in love with the one person in all the world I had the least right to, and I have been trying to set you free of me ever since, and failing, and I am done failing at it now. He straightened, and it cost him, and he said the thing he had plainly come into that little room to say. So here is what I have to give you, and it is the only honest gift I own. Your father's name is cleared. The debt my family made is paid. Tonight, before the whole county. And you owe me nothing, and you never did. You are free. You may take your cleared name and your good shop and your own life back to Cresmere tomorrow, and never think of Wynhaven again. And I will not follow you, and I will not write, and I will be glad every day that I was able at the very last to give you back the one thing we took. He bowed his head. That is what I owed you. I pay it gladly, and it asks nothing in return. You stand under no obligation to me of any kind whatever. I wanted you to hear me say it, and to know that I meant it before I said the other thing. And what is the other thing? Said Linnet, who found she could hardly breathe. That I love you, he said simply, not out of guilt. The guilt is paid. Out of nothing now but you. And that if you should ever, freely, wanting nothing and needing nothing and owing nothing, of your own entire choice, wish to come back, you would find me waiting, however long it took, for I have got quite out of the habit of wanting anything at all, except that. For a long moment Linnet, who had built her whole life upon needing no one, stood in the guttering candlelight and looked at the one man who had ever offered her a thing with no hook set in it, and understood that he had, in his grave ruined way, just done the single hardest thing a man could do for a woman such as her. He had set her free. He had made quite certain she owed him nothing. He had left her, at the end of everything, with a clear and unforced choice, and so she made it. "I spent 8 years," she said, "telling a whole town that I had remained single by choice, and it was true. It was the truest thing I ever said. And I would say it again tomorrow to anyone who asked, for it was mine, and I chose it, and I was never once ashamed of it." She stepped toward him. "But a choice you are not free to unmake is no choice at all. It is only a wall with a prettier name, and I did not guard my freedom so fiercely all these years to discover in the end that I was not free to change my mind." She took his face in her bandaged hands, gently as he had taken hers by the fire. "I am still single by choice, Alaric, and I choose now, freely wanting nothing and owing nothing, not to be. That is the whole of it. That is what my freedom was always for." He shut his eyes. "I keep my shop, mind," she said, against his cheek, and felt, rather than heard him begin at last to laugh, a rusty, disused, astonished sound. "I did not claw my own name onto my own door to hand it back for yours. We shall keep the shop, you and I, and the library, and every book in England, and we shall fill the margins of the whole lot with arguing until we are as old and as wicked as your grandmother, and I shall still, on principle, be right." They were married in the spring, quietly, in the small church at Wynhaven, and the Dowager Duchess wept all the way through it, and denied it furiously afterward, and lived, out of what her grandson swore was pure contrariness, another 5 years. Long enough to bounce a dark-eyed great-grandchild upon her knee, and inform it that both its parents were fools, who had very nearly died of their own good sense, and that it was to promise her faithfully never to be half so clever. The account, at the last, balanced. Not the old one. The old one could never be balanced, not truly, for the dead stay dead, and a cleared name is a cold thing to lay upon a grave. But Linnet, who had once looked hard at all that marriage costs a woman and all that it pays her and found the sum set against her, came in time to keep a different reckoning, and to find it came out, year upon year, astonishingly in her favor. She kept her shop, and her name over its door, and her own counsel, exactly as she had promised, and she kept besides a grave, quiet man who loved her without condition, and argued with her without mercy, and never once mistook her independence for a thing that wanted curing. The town of Cressmere never did entirely understand it. A woman who might have been a duchess in name and idleness, and who kept a bookshop instead, and seemed, past all sense, entirely happy about it. But then the town of Cressmere had never understood her, and she had long since stopped needing it to. She had said, once, to a cold and honest man in a great gray library, that she had remained single by choice, and had watched something begin in his still face that neither of them had a name for yet. She had been right, as she generally was. It had only ever been a question of choosing, and offered at last a choice, with no hook in it and no debt behind it. She had chosen him, freely, owing nothing, for no reason under heaven but that she wished to, which is, when all the grand words are spent, the only way that anything worth the keeping is ever truly chosen at all.